So today we're going to talk about self-esteem, and here's why. I've talked about curiosity, and I've talked about questions and the importance of asking questions, and the whole idea of questions kind of being a thematic way to sort of live your life. And it strikes me that maybe people are thinking, so what's the practical application? So by talking about self-esteem, I'm gonna give you a practical application, and for that we need to go to the chalkboard. So here we are at the chalkboard. The reason why you're here is because I want to kind of deal with this in a kind of a graphic way. Uh, the idea of self-esteem has been around for a little while, not actually very long. There was this, if you Google self-esteem, you'll see, if you Google word origin for self-esteem, you'll see that its first use was, I guess, somewhere back in the 1700s. I wasn't able to find exactly what that use was. I'm not sure what that was. But you'll also see where some early psychologists, sociologists started to think about the idea that children really needed to have a self. And you can read all about exactly what they meant by that. I'm not going to go into that here. But the problem that I have with this idea of self-esteem is that ultimately what happens is you get this constructed sense of self, and then you have sort of this third-party evaluative piece that you might consider esteem, that is evaluating this self thing. And ultimately it's that part that I believe creates the problem for most people, because it becomes an external sense of evaluating who you are, what you stand for, what matters to you, and generally not in the kind of curious questioning way that I'm talking about in the seven billion geniuses process. This is generally an evaluative position that comes from things that we're supposed to be, things that we're supposed to have, the sort of things that the culture deems to be what are right and what are wrong. And so it puts us in a position where we're making determinations about the goodness or badness of this self thing, connected to things that are completely out of our control, not of our making, and not necessarily anything that we would choose. So to determine one's sense of that very essence of my being based on something that I'm not even down with or have signed off on, is something that the 7 billion geniuses process kind of stands against. And I'll tell you what the alternative is. So for the alternative, we move to not a graphic process, not something that I'm going to draw, not something that I'm going to put on a board, because that's confining. The alternative really is to say that my sense of who I am can be based on those things that I'm doing right here, right now, the choices that I'm making, the things that I stand for in this moment right here, right now. So for me, like for example, right now, to be basing my sense of self, I don't know if you can hear those squirrels in a tangle over there, but that's the noise that you're hearing. Base my sense of self on what I'm doing right now. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to express a different way to evaluate who I am, that's based on what I'm doing right now, and I'm kind of okay with it. I'm trying to reach out and to stand up against a sense of evaluation that is inherently, I think, destructive because it's based on things that are outside of our control. It's inherently limiting because it's based on a certain set of possibilities about who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to be, and offering an alternative that says it can be just about anything and related to your sense of what you're doing right now, which also makes it completely changeable. So if I'm actually not okay with what I'm doing right now, I can do something different right now and change that self from this constructed, restricted thing into a constantly evolving, constantly changing nothing, not a thing, I don't know what you can call that. It's a perpetually changing, ever evolving, well, it's what reality actually is. There's no theoretical physicist, there's no cosmologist, there's no biologist who would tell you that everything is always the same and that anything is ever set. At least not anybody who's connected with the current science that's been around for the past 20 years. It's all coming down to this notion that everything is always changing, everything is constantly evolving, and we're in a process of perpetual change, everything all the time. What you see around me, this glass, that window frame, everything is constantly breaking down, coming apart, turning into something else, evolving through in a process. And so the idea that this sense of self is a constructed, restricted, specific thing makes absolutely no sense, not only in my way of thinking, but in the way of thinking of people who are far more specific, whose science is far harder than any of the science that psychology or sociology is connected to. And so by migrating this self thing away from something that can be evaluated and esteemed or not as a concrete specific thing into something that's constantly evolving and fluctuating and metamorphosizing into something else is actually very consistent with what current science is. Not that that's so important, but just if for your information, that happens to be the case. And so in summary, the position of curiosity and questioning into creates an opportunity for anybody who wants to take up this idea to think about themselves as something that you can be curious about and ask questions into as it continually evolves. And as you ask those questions into or are curious about this sense of self in the moment that you're in right now, if you don't like it, you can change it based on the things that you might choose to do in this moment right now that will morph it into whatever kind of sense the person who's asking these questions would want to morph it into. So, self-esteem and the 7 billion geniuses process. Hope this was useful. Please subscribe and do stay in touch.